In 1717, one man made a decision that accidentally rewired the entire global economy for the next 200 years. Isaac Newton sat in a dim office at the Tower of London, calculating metal ratios that would determine which coins people trusted and which ones vanished from circulation. He got the numbers slightly wrong, and that mistake became the most important financial system of the modern age. What happens when the world's greatest scientist becomes its most powerful banker, and a simple calculation error reshapes empires? Isaac Newton wasn't just a physicist who discovered gravity. By 1717, he'd spent 21 years as master of the Royal Mint, the man responsible for Britain's money. His job was to set the official exchange rate between gold and silver coins, keeping both metals circulating smoothly through the economy. On September 21, 1717, Newton submitted a report to the Treasury that fixed the gold guinea at 21 silver shillings, instead of the previous 20. This matters now because Newton's decision created the gold standard, the system that governed international trade until 1971. It shaped how countries borrowed, how currencies competed, and how empires rose and fell based on metal supplies. In 1717, Britain operated under bimetallism, where both gold and silver served as money. A guinea gold coin could buy 20 silver shillings, and people used whichever metal was more convenient. But the system was crumbling under invisible pressure. Silver coins were clipped and underweight from centuries of wear and counterfeiting. Newton himself estimated that about 20% of the silver coins in circulation were fake. Meanwhile, gold was flooding into Britain from an unexpected source. Brazilian mines had struck enormous deposits in the 1690s, and by the early 1700s, over 800 metric tons of gold had flowed to Portugal. Two-thirds of that Brazilian gold ended up in English hands through trade. Portuguese traders needed British textiles, weapons, and manufactured goods, so they paid in gold. Britain's gold supply tripled between 1701 and 1780, from 9.25 million pounds to 26 million pounds. Credit was stable, but the currency itself was physically deteriorating. Silver was leaving Britain for trade with China and India, where it bought more than it did at home. Gold was arriving faster than anyone expected. The country was unknowingly sitting on a currency crisis disguised as prosperity. The story begins not in 1717, but in the 1690s, deep in the mountains of Minas Gerais, Brazil. Portuguese adventurers, called bandeirantes, discovered massive gold deposits in 1695 while exploring the interior. Within 3 years, Vila Rica was founded, becoming the capital of a gold rush that would transform the Atlantic world. By 1730, the mining town had 40,000 people, more than double the population of New York at the time. The gold flowed along a predictable path. Brazilian miners extracted it, Portuguese authorities taxed it at 20%, and ships carried it across the Atlantic to Lisbon. There, English merchants traded textiles and manufactured goods for the precious metal. Between 1700 and 1790, approximately 45 million pounds worth of Brazilian gold entered England. That's roughly $450 billion in today's money. Portugal became dependent on this gold to balance its trade deficit with Britain. The kingdom imported 4 to 5 times more in British goods than it exported, paying the difference entirely in gold. Documents from that time show Portuguese gold coins circulated openly in British markets, legal tender alongside English currency. Newton noticed something peculiar. The Royal Mint was receiving enormous quantities of gold but almost no foreign silver. He investigated and discovered why. Continental Europe valued silver more highly relative to gold than Britain did. A British guinea worth 20 shillings in London could be melted down, shipped to France or Spain, exchanged for silver, brought back to England, and recoined for a profit. The profit was small, about 9 pence per guinea, roughly 4%. But merchants and money changers exploited this gap relentlessly. Good silver coins disappeared from circulation, shipped abroad where they fetched better prices. Only gold and clipped, worthless silver remained in England. Newton studied the exchange ratios across Europe meticulously. In Spain, fine gold was worth 16 times its weight in silver. In France, the ratio was 15 to 1. In Holland, Italy, and Germany, ratios clustered between 14.8 and 15.2 to 1. But in England, the official rate was effectively 15.2 to 1, slightly favoring gold over what continental markets offered. On September 21, 1717, Newton submitted his findings. He recommended reducing the guinea's value from 21 shillings and sixpence to 21 shillings flat. This tiny adjustment shifted Britain's gold-to-silver ratio from roughly 15:1 to about 15.2:1. Newton believed this would stop silver from leaving and gold from flooding in. He was wrong about the outcome but right about the mechanism. The new ratio made gold even more attractive relative to silver. Instead of balancing the two metals, Newton's rate pushed silver out of circulation entirely. Within decades, Britain accidentally operated on a de facto gold standard, the only major economy to do so. Britain formally adopted the gold standard through a series of steps in the early 1800s. The Great Recoinage of 1816 introduced subsidiary silver coins with limited legal tender status, replacing the old full-weight silver. The gold sovereign replaced the guinea in 1817, worth exactly £1 sterling. The Bank Charter Act of 1844 institutionalized gold backing for banknotes. The Brazilian gold supply proved crucial. Production peaked around mid-century at over 140,000 kilograms annually, 7 times the output from the 1690s. This massive supply gave Britain the gold reserves needed to make the system work. Portuguese gold coins were so common in England and Ireland that they circulated as everyday currency for decades. Then came the domino effect. Germany's unification in 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War, created the next catalyst. Germany extracted $1 billion in gold from France as war reparations and switched from silver to gold currency on July 9, 1873. This decision by a major European power triggered a continental scramble. France, Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy joined the gold standard in 1873 and 74 as the Latin Monetary Union. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands followed in 75 and 76. The United States, recovering from the Civil War, made its banknotes convertible to gold in 1873, abandoning silver. By the 1890s, most major economies operated on gold. The classical gold standard period, from 1870 to 1914, became the era of peak international monetary coordination. Exchange rates were fixed, trade expanded rapidly, and Britain's financial dominance through the City of London reached its zenith. Newton's original report provides the documentary foundation. His September 21, 1717 submission detailed the exact gold-to-silver ratios across European kingdoms, calculated from assays he personally supervised at the mint. He wrote that gold arriving at the mint came without foreign silver because merchants found it more profitable to export silver and import gold. Trade records confirm the gold flow. An English merchant in Lisbon wrote to the British government, describing how British manufacturers went to Portugal at 4 to 5 times the value of Portuguese goods returning. He noted that every convoy and packet ship carried vast sums of gold back to England. Portuguese colonial records document the scale. The municipality of Ouro Preto reached 40,000 inhabitants by 1730, making it Latin America's most populous city, when New York had fewer than 20,000 people. Official figures show 800 metric tons of gold shipped to Portugal in the 18th century, though illegal smuggling meant actual production was higher. Monetary historians cross-reference these flows. Research from the 1950s established that English gold coin circulation increased from £9.25 million in 1701 to £22.5 million by 1773. Portuguese currency issues correlated directly with Portugal's commercial deficit with England, confirming that gold flowed to cover trade imbalances. The policy trail is equally clear. The Bank of England Act of 1833, the Bank Charter Act of 1844, and the Act for Resumption of Cash Payments in 1819 formalized gold convertibility. Germany's adoption followed the Treaty of Frankfurt, ending the Franco-Prussian War, with enabling legislation passed between 1871 and 1873. Historians debate whether Newton made an honest mistake or intended to favor gold. Some argue he was simply calibrating to market rates and couldn't foresee the consequences. His ratio of 15.2 to 1 matched what he observed in continental Europe, so he may have believed it would stabilize flows rather than drive silver out completely. Others suggest Newton deliberately overvalued gold to combat counterfeiting. With 20% of silver coins fake, pushing transactions toward gold could have been a covert policy to clean up the currency. Newton had spent years prosecuting counterfeiters, personally sending dozens to execution. He understood the threat fake coins posed to trust in money. A third interpretation frames it as a practical accident. Newton was responding to an immediate problem: gold flooding the mint without silver. His solution addressed the symptom, not realizing it would amplify the underlying cause. Economic historians note that bimetallic systems were inherently unstable. Any fixed ratio between fluctuating market prices creates arbitrage opportunities. The role of Brazilian gold itself generates dispute. Some scholars emphasize Brazil's importance as the enabling factor. Without that massive supply, Britain couldn't have sustained a gold-only system. Others argue British financial innovation mattered more, pointing to the acceptance of banknotes and token coinage as the real breakthrough. Portugal's decline adds another dimension. Recent research frames the gold influx as a resource curse that destroyed Portuguese industry. The real exchange rate appreciated 30% during the 18th century, as gold raised prices for non-traded goods, making Portuguese manufacturers uncompetitive. But critics note Portugal's absolutist government and restrictive trade policies would have hindered development regardless of gold flows. The speed of global adoption also puzzles economists. Why did Germany's 1873 decision trigger a rush when Britain had used gold since 1717? Network effects provide one answer. Once multiple major economies coordinated on gold, others faced pressure to join or be excluded from stable trade relationships. Gold became a club, and staying on silver meant isolation. Gaps remain in the evidence. We don't have Newton's private thoughts on whether he expected silver to disappear. No diary entries reveal his intent. We can't quantify precisely how much Brazilian gold reached England through informal channels beyond official trade statistics. Smuggling was rampant, and Portuguese tax records only capture the official levy. The shift to gold changed who could participate in commerce. Gold coins had high value, the guinea worth 21 shillings, making them impractical for daily purchases. A skilled artisan in 15th century England earned about 6 pence per day. A guinea represented 42 days of wages, equivalent to someone today buying groceries with a $10,000 bill. Small transactions required silver or copper coinage. As silver disappeared, ordinary people struggled with the lack of small change. The shortage became severe enough that private tokens and underweight copper coins circulated informally. Workers couldn't easily get paid in divisible amounts. Shopkeepers couldn't make change. The introduction of token silver coins in the early 1800s addressed this, but for decades, the currency system failed the working class. Wealthy merchants trading internationally benefited from stable gold-backed credit. Laborers and small farmers bore the cost of monetary dysfunction at the retail level. In Portugal, the gold curse hit differently. The flood of Brazilian wealth should have brought prosperity, yet it gutted the economy. Portuguese manufacturers couldn't compete with cheap British textiles paid for with Brazilian gold. Grain imports rose as domestic agriculture declined. Employment in traded sectors fell sharply after 1750. By the 19th century, Portugal had transformed from a leading colonial power into one of Western Europe's poorest nations. The reversal of fortune stemmed partly from the very treasure that seemed like a blessing. Gold made imports affordable, destroying the incentive to build domestic industry. When the Brazilian mines depleted after 1760, Portugal was left without both gold and the manufacturing base to generate wealth independently. Brazil itself experienced boom and bust. The mining regions exploded with population and commerce, then collapsed when deposits ran dry. Villa Rica, once Latin America's greatest city, fell into decline by the late 1700s. Slaves, who performed the brutal labor of panning and sluicing, saw none of the profits and bore all of the physical cost. The global adoption of the gold standard brought benefits and constraints. Countries on gold enjoyed stable exchange rates, making international trade and investment smoother. Merchants knew exactly what foreign currency was worth, reducing the friction in cross-border commerce. This stability is credited with facilitating the rapid expansion of trade from 1870 to 1914. But gold also chained governments. During economic downturns, countries couldn't print money to create jobs or stimulate spending because currency had to remain convertible to gold at fixed rates. This rigidity is blamed for deepening the Great Depression in the 1930s. Countries that abandoned gold earlier, like Britain in 1931, recovered faster than those that clung to it. Think of Newton's decision as setting the thermostat for the global economy, except he could only adjust it once, and the effects lasted centuries. Bimetallism was like having two currencies simultaneously, gold and silver, both legal money but with fluctuating market values. This created constant arbitrage, like having dollars and euros both accepted in your local store, but the exchange rate changing daily. Merchants made profits not from productive work, but from exploiting price gaps between metals. Newton tried to fix the exchange rate to stop this arbitrage. But fixing the price of two commodities with independent supply and demand is like trying to mandate that apples always cost exactly twice what oranges cost. As soon as apple harvests boom or orange crops fail, the fixed price creates shortages of one and surpluses of the other. In Britain's case, gold supply exploded from Brazil, while demand for silver surged in Asia. China needed silver for its massive internal economy, but had little use for European goods, so silver flowed east and gold flowed west. Newton's ratio just formalized what the market was already doing, but it institutionalized gold dominance rather than resisting it. The gold standard succeeded because it was simple and credible. Every currency was defined as a specific weight of gold. Exchange rates became automatic arithmetic. If a British pound was defined as a quarter ounce of gold, and a US dollar as a 20th of an ounce, the exchange rate was automatically $4.86 per pound. No negotiation, no government manipulation, just physics and weight. This automaticity created trust. Lenders knew their loans would be repaid in gold equivalent value, not inflated away with paper. Trade flourished because currency risk disappeared. The price paid was flexibility. When crops failed or banks collapsed, governments couldn't inject money to cushion the shock. They had to watch unemployment rise while gold flowed out to foreign creditors. The system was self-correcting in theory, but painful in practice. A country running trade deficits lost gold, which reduced its money supply, which lowered prices, making its exports cheaper and imports more expensive, correcting the deficit. But deflation meant falling wages, business failures, and social unrest. The correction worked through suffering. Newton didn't plan any of this. He was solving an immediate technical problem with coins. But his solution clicked with the underlying economic forces of his era, Brazilian gold and Asian silver demand, creating conditions where gold could dominate. Technology mattered too. The acceptance of banknotes, pioneered by the Bank of England, meant gold didn't need to physically circulate. Banks could hold gold reserves while paper moved through commerce. Portugal's tragedy illustrates the resource curse in its clearest form. Imagine winning the lottery, but using all the money to buy groceries instead of investing in education or tools. That's what happened to Portugal. Gold paid for immediate consumption of foreign goods, but didn't build factories or improve agriculture. When the gold ran out, nothing remained. Britain, by contrast, used Portuguese gold to fund its manufacturing base, eventually becoming the workshop of the world. The lesson is about systems and feedback loops. Money isn't neutral. How it's designed shapes incentives for centuries. Newton's calculation created a monetary ecosystem where gold-holding countries gained advantage, driving others to accumulate gold, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. That ecosystem persisted until the system's rigidity finally broke under the pressure of World War I and the Great Depression. Newton's 1717 decision reveals that global monetary systems can emerge from accidents as much as from design. Britain stumbled into gold primacy. Then other nations copied what appeared to be a successful British innovation. The gold standard became hegemonic not because economists proved it optimal, but because network effects made joining rational once enough countries participated. The fundamental lesson is about constraints and credibility. Tying currency to gold limited government power to manipulate money, which prevented runaway inflation and built trust. But it also prevented governments from responding to economic shocks, turning recessions into depressions. There's always a trade-off between flexibility and discipline in monetary systems. It was like the economy betting on a single metal supply remaining stable relative to economic growth. When that bet worked, trade flourished. When it failed, rigidity caused devastation. The system's genius was its simplicity, and its fatal flaw was the same simplicity. For Portugal, the resource curse demonstrates that natural wealth without productive capacity creates vulnerability. Gold funded consumption, but not development. Britain invested the same gold in industry and finance, turning temporary treasure into permanent economic power. The metal mattered less than what countries did with it. The 200-year dominance of the gold standard shows how deeply monetary arrangements shape geopolitics. Britain's gold-based financial system made London the center of global finance. Countries needing gold-backed credit turned to British banks. That financial centrality translated into political influence. A technical decision about coin ratios became an architecture of empire. Newton probably never imagined his report would matter beyond fixing a nagging minting problem. But small technical choices made at leverage points in complex systems can cascade in unpredictable ways. The man who explained how gravity shapes planets also accidentally shaped how money shapes nations. We know Isaac Newton miscalculated the gold-to-silver ratio in 1717, overvaluing gold relative to continental Europe. We know Brazilian mines flooded Britain with gold, while Asian trade drained silver. We know this combination pushed Britain onto an accidental gold standard that became the global norm by 1873. What remains uncertain is whether Newton intended any of this. We don't know if he foresaw silver's disappearance or thought he was just fine-tuning a bimetallic system. We can't precisely quantify how much the gold standard accelerated trade versus how much it constrained crisis response. But we can trace the consequences forward from that September day in 1717, when one man's calculations set the course for 2 centuries of global commerce. Newton changed the world twice. Once with calculus and gravity, discoveries we celebrate in physics textbooks. And once with a miscalculation about coins, a decision that quietly structured global power for generations. The second transformation was accidental, emerging from technical fixes and Brazilian mines rather than from deliberate design. But accidents can shape history as powerfully as intentions. The gold standard era ended officially in 1971, when the United States stopped converting dollars to gold. Yet its logic persists in debates about monetary discipline, central bank credibility, and the nature of money itself. Today, when cryptocurrency advocates describe Bitcoin as digital gold, when economists argue about inflation and trust, when nations stockpile reserves and worry about currency stability, they're wrestling with questions Newton's mistake first crystallized 3 centuries ago. What backs our money? What makes it trustworthy? Can governments be trusted with printing presses? Or does currency need an anchor beyond human control? These aren't just technical questions. They're questions about power, about who wins and who loses when money changes, about whether stability is worth the cost of rigidity. Newton never answered these questions. He just set them in motion with numbers on a page, in a candlelit office at the Tower of London. And in the end, maybe that's the most profound lesson. The systems that shape our lives, the invisible architecture of trade, trust, and value, often begin not with grand vision, but with someone trying to solve Tuesday's problem. Newton wanted to stop silver from leaving the mint. He ended up redesigning the world. History doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the calculations of a tired bureaucrat on an autumn afternoon, armed with nothing but a quill and the wrong answer to a simple question about the price of gold.